Hi everyone. Welcome to Azure Data Factory video series part two. So, so in this part two, we'll be exploring about top level concepts within ADF. So ADF, which is Azure Data Factory, is composed of few concepts. It's composed of few tools, I could say. So we will try to explore about those tools in this video series. So if you're new to the channel, I would request you to subscribe so that you get notification, and it also encourages us to add or create these kind of content. And if you're new to the ADF, I would highly recommend you to go through video one before watching this video two. Okay, without any further ado, let's get into the top level concepts within ADF. So Azure Data Factory, in the previous video, we've already created one instance of Azure Data Factory, and we've seen how to create Azure Data Factory from the portal using the user interface of Azure portal. Okay, and there are different ways as well. So here we'll be looking about the top level concepts within ADF. So without these concepts or without these components, ADF is nothing. So we have very high level concepts within ADF, and we'll try to explore them here. And the first one is pipelines. And then we have activities, data sets, linked services, data flows, integration runtimes, and triggers. Okay. So these components work together. So it can be either individual based on the use case what you're working with. For example, you've created a pipeline. Pipeline is a combination of activities. We'll see that. And then you haven't created triggers. You just wanted to do it manually. So they can work together, or you can do it manually as well. There you don't need triggers, so they can work individually as well. It completely depends on the use case, on the requirement on which you're working. Okay, so let's say let's take an ideal scenario where all these components work together to provide the platform on which you can compose data driven workflows, right? Data driven pipelines, which are mainly used to move the data from one destination or from one source to other destination, or to transform the data. Let's try to see each and everything in a very high level, and again in coming series, in the coming videos, we will try to create them, and we'll try to create them with different examples and also the best practices as well. Okay, so first, what is pipeline? So a data factory might have one or more pipelines. Clear? So data factory is a combination of one or more pipelines. And then what is a pipeline? So a pipeline is a logical grouping of activities. Then what is activity, right? Because see, you have an activity, then the combination of activities is called a pipeline, and a data factory can have a combination of pipelines. See, if you go from the reverse order, from bottom to top, then it's easy for you to understand. But let's try to understand the pipeline here before moving to the activities. Okay, so basically pipeline is a logical grouping of activities. Just remember this, and I will also show you in the portal how it actually looks. Okay, and then mainly it is used to perform a unit of work. Okay, and then together the activities in the pipeline perform the task. Okay, so the activities perform the task, and the pipeline, the whole pipeline, which is the combination of activities, will perform the work. Okay, for example, I think again this is a standard example which I have copied from the Microsoft side. Microsoft has a very detailed documentation written in their site about every service. But here we are trying to break them down into simple terms so that it will be easy for you to understand rather than reading the whole document, because it's text and sometimes it gets boring as well. So basically I've copied this example statement from the document itself. So here what it says is a pipeline can contain a group of activities that ingest data from an Azure blob and then runs Hive query on HD Insight cluster to partition the data. So this is a basic example they have given there, but we will see with another example which will help us to understand in an easy manner. Moving forward, we have an activity, right? So activities represent a processing step in a pipeline. So basically activities are the one which will perform the task. So group of activities is called a pipeline. Okay, for example, you wanted to copy the data from one place to another place, so you have an activity called copy activity which could perform this task for you, right? So I think now is the best time for me to show you the portal which will try to help you to understand further on these two things. One is pipeline and the other one is activities. Okay, don't forget that. And If I go to the portal, the one which we've created before in video part one, which is data factory. So this is the instance we've created. So here, if I go to author, right? If I click on author, then I have a couple of options within that, and then here you can see we have pipeline, we have a data set. Let me pull my pen. So we have a pipeline, we have data set, we have data flows, and we have Power Query. Okay, but I am right now interested in the pipeline. So what I do is, so usually, like I said, you can create multiple pipelines within Azure Data Factory. So if you click on this guy, and then you have an option to click on new pipeline. Okay, I click on new pipeline, then I have a couple of other options here. Okay, so let me close this one so that we have enough space here to explore on this console. Okay, so here if you see, once I click on create new pipeline, I have an option activities, and within activities I see so many options here. Okay, I think now you're getting what I meant of group of activities is called a pipeline, right? So for example, there are activities again grouped into each and every, component here. For example, you wanted to do move and transform kind of operation, right? And those operation related activities are within this folder. So if I have to tell you, compare you them with the folders, which is easy to understand for us in simple terms. So consider move and transform is a folder, data explorer is a folder, Azure function is a folder. And for example, if I wanted to have move and transform related operations, that's within this folder. I click on that, then I have two options. Okay, so I've also told there is a component called data flow which is used to visually create transformations. We'll see that in the coming sections, but basically we've also seen a copy data activity, right? So basically this is one activity, and like I said, it's very easy console and drag and drop user interface. That's the main reason I told that Azure Data Factory is 60 to 70% of day-to-day activities you use as a data engineer, because everything is already developed here. The interface is developed, the activities are developed. You don't have to do a custom programming for basic functionalities or maybe for complex functionalities, because Microsoft, they've been there in the industry. They already have a tool called SSIS, so they already know all the normal data transformation related tasks. So they have already created all these options for us as out of box solution. So you don't have to spend more time in the development phase. So the time to market is very less here. So you have a drag and drop interface. So you just need to understand how to use them, how to configure them, and how to use them according to the best practices and based on your requirement. So that's the only thing you need to know here. Okay. Coming back to this, so you have an activity, let's say copy activity. So you usually drag and drop, and then you give some information related to source and sync. Basically, you see one here, which means it's a mandatory. So you need to fill that for this to validate without any errors. Okay. So then you give source information, then you give sync, which is a target information, and then basically you run this activity. So to run this activity, you need to run this pipeline. Okay. Here the pipeline name is pipeline 1, because I haven't given any name. So by default, it gave me pipeline 1. If I try to create pipeline 2, it gives me pipeline 2. I can also give it as a name as well. So basically, this is pipeline. I can also create another pipeline. I can also rename this existing pipeline. So there are so many things which I could do with this. Here I can create another pipeline, for example, and I could just click on this and say rename, for example, uh, first pipeline. Okay. And again, now we have two pipelines. Okay, one is pipeline 1 and the other one is first underscore pipeline, and within this you have a combination of activities. So mainly this is what I wanted to show here. What is pipeline and what is activity? What are activities? So pipeline activities are the group of activities is called a pipeline, and a group of pipelines you can create them within the Azure Data Factory. Now let's move back to the slide. So we've seen what is activity. Then if I go back, now we have other things which is called datasets and linked services. Okay, so these are also very important concepts when it comes to a data factory. So these two are a little bit tricky, but you need to focus here, because to understand them, you need to give a little bit more attention. Okay, let's try to see what is dataset. So dataset represents data structures within the data stores, okay, which simply point to or reference the data you want to use in your activities, okay, as inputs or outputs. Okay, we have seen what is activity or what are activities. So basically in activities, we have seen a copy activity, right? So there you have input, which is source. You also have a sync, which is output, right? And to configure them, you need to point to the exact data set. For example, you have Azure storage accounts or Azure Data Lake. Let's say Azure Data Lake is your source and Azure SQL database is your target, right? Source is Azure Data Lake. That will be a data set. And Azure SQL database is your destination, is your target. That will be data set 2. Okay. So basically data set is nothing but a data structure which you're pointing to the actual data set. So you need to create data sets beforehand to use them in the activities. Okay, then what is linked services? So linked services are much like connection strings. Okay, so so this is what I am talking. Linked services are much like connection strings. Okay, for example, I hope many of you are familiar with databases. Okay, so let's say there is a database. Well, let's say there is a SQL database, and to connect to the database, you need to provide connection strings. When I say connection strings, you need to provide the server details, you need to provide the database instance name, and you also need to provide authentication details like username, password, either whether it's a Windows authenticated or SQL Server authenticated or integrated, federated like single sign-on authenticated, for example. Okay, so these are all called as connection strings. Okay, so that is what you configure in the linked service. Now I wanted to connect to SQL Server database. I provide all this information and I create linked service underscore SQL Server database. That's a linked service I've created. Now within this database, you have like n number of tables. Let's say you have like 10 tables: customer table, sales table, and date table, all the dimensions and facts, for example. Okay. And now to connect to a customer table, you need to create a data set. So that is what we discussed in the previous line on what is data set. Okay, so just there is like a very slight line between these two. So linked services mainly handle on the connection string level. Data set is the actual data structure or a data set where you are pointing to. Okay, if I take another example, which I've also added here. See, for example, an Azure storage service. When I say Azure Data Lake, okay. So to connect to Azure storage service, you need to know the storage account details, and then also the connection strings, like the key and the password, for example. Okay, the access token keys. Those are all called linked services. So you can also configure using RBAC, role-based access control, using Azure Active Directory. Let's not get there, but what I'm trying to say here is to connect to Azure Data Lake, you need to provide some information. Data Lake, name and authentication. You've created a linked service. Now, within the Azure Data Lake, you will have different containers, and within those containers, you will have different directories, and those are called data sets. Okay, that's what exactly here this line is saying here. So Azure Storage Link Service specifies a connection string to connect to Azure Storage account, and additionally an Azure Blob data set specifies which container and the folder the actual data contains. Okay, so that's the basic difference between data set and link service. So when it comes to working with Azure Data Factory, you'll be creating n number of linked services, you'll be creating n number of data sets, and you'll be using them in the activities and also in the pipelines. And that is the reason we need to understand them very carefully. And I can quickly show you in the portal as well. So here you can see here under the author, you can see there is an option called dataset. So from here you can create a new dataset. Okay, so this is where you create the dataset. Let me close these options here. Okay, close, yes, close and discard, close and discard. And if I go to manage, this is where you can create a linked service. So you can also create a linked service from here. There are other places as well where you can create a linked service. Once you try to create the data set, it will ask you to select the linked service. If you don't have a linked service, it will also give you an option to create a new linked service there. Okay, so that is the other place where you could create the linked service, but basically under the manage also you can create linked service. If you click on new, it'll ask you a couple of options, exactly like which data source or which data destination you're trying to create as a linked service. Like you need to provide those connection strings. But in this section, we are not going to create any linked service, but in the coming sections, we'll create them. But in this section, it is very important for you to understand about pipelines, activities, linked service, and data sets. That's the main agenda. And if I go back to our slide again, then we have integration runtime. So this is also a very important concept when it comes to Azure Data Factory. So let's try to see what the definition says here. In Data Factory, an activity defines the action to be performed. We have seen that. A linked service defines the target data store or compute service. We have seen that. So linked service is basically pointing to the data store, like the connection, using the connection string. Activity defines what action we need to perform. Then what is integration runtime? So an integration runtime provides bridge between activity and linked service. Yeah. So why we need integration runtime? So you have an activity and you have a data source. So you need to have a bridge to connect these two. So in terms of technical language, you need to have a compute resource. You need to have a compute, or you need to have a processing unit to run to pull the data from the data source and apply the activity on top of that. So you need a bridge. So this is basically the job of integration runtime, right? So it's referenced by the linked service or activity and provides the compute environment. So this is what I was talking. It gives you the compute environment. For example, you have written a SQL query, but you need to execute that SQL query. To execute the SQL query, you need to have a compute environment. So basically the integration runtime gives you the compute environment. So there are different types of integration runtimes, like Azure by default provides an integration runtime. You have self integration runtime, you have hosted integration runtimes. We will see them in the coming sections, but here you need to understand what is integration runtimes. Okay. And if I and one another important aspect when it comes to integration runtime, again this is also very important in terms of Microsoft Azure Data Engineer certification as well. So this activity can be performed in the region closest possible to the target data store or compute service, and which is mainly needed to meet the security and compliance needs. Okay, for example, we are talking about a bank use case, and the bank is located in somewhere within Europe, and within Europe you have a compliance called GDPR. So mainly GDPR says that the data within the Europe region should not move outside the Europe region, for example. Okay. And and the data stores are located in the Europe, and you also need a compute resource also within the Europe. For example, the data is located in Europe and you can't create a compute resource, or you can't deploy a compute resource in Asia Pacific, right? Azure has data centers in different locations, and different continents and different countries. But let's say you have the data in the Europe, so you also need to create an integration runtime, like self-hosted integration runtime within the Europe, or managed runtime or managed IR within the Europe, right? So it means the data is stored in the Europe, the computing is also happening in the Europe. So your data is not moving outside the Europe, right? And this is very important in terms of security and compliance needs, because we do not, or the European region, based on the compliance rules, doesn't want the data to be moved to another location for computing of processing purposes. Okay. And if I show you where you can create these integration runtimes, you go to manage again, and then you see here you have integration runtimes. Like I said, by default, you have Azure integration runtime created for you when you create Azure Data Factory instance, right? So you have created an Azure Data Factory instance, right? And we haven't created this integration runtime, but Data Factory itself, Azure itself created as this default IR for us. In short form, it is called IR. But you can also create, different integration runtimes. We will see them in the coming sections. And moving back, triggers. Okay, triggers are very important. So trigger basically is like, triggers represent a unit of processing that determines when, this is important, when a pipeline execution needs to be kicked off. Let's say you've created a pipeline, a data pipeline. Okay, so you've created a pipeline. So now for testing purpose, you have ran it manually. You've given source and destination. It has done some transformation, and it has copied the data to so and so locations. Now you wanted to run this pipeline every day at 9 o'clock a.m. in the morning. And you don't want to do it like, by yourself getting up in the morning and clicking on that trigger, like, run now, run now, run now. No. So that is where you have these schedule based triggers. Again, within triggers, there are different types, right? Event based, schedule based, and we'll also see them. Basically, the trigger actually does the schedule based trigger. Actually, you can also, configure them. So every day 9 a.m. I want my pipeline to be triggered, my pipeline to be in the running mode. So what you can do is you can configure that, you can create a new trigger, and you can say that I want this has to be a scheduled trigger, and you can define the time, and you can also pass the parameters, and that will trigger your pipeline every day at 9 a.m. in the morning. Okay, so for example, for batch processings, or for end of the day reports, or month end reports, or year end reports, basically they schedule these triggers. And there are also different types of triggers which we'll see. And if I go to the portal, so basically within the manage section you can see them here. So this is a place where you get where you can create the triggers. And if you go to author, and if you click on pipeline, for example, let's create, because I haven't saved those pipelines. And if I click on new pipeline, so you can also add a trigger here. For example, if I drag and drop the copy activity, so you can also trigger it now, which is manual, and you can also create a trigger. So there are a couple of places where you can create these triggers, right? And we will also see that when we discuss about pipelines, when we discuss about actual activities. But for now, just remember, trigger is mainly used to execute your pipeline. Yeah. So I think that's it. And these are very important concepts, and you need to understand, and you need to remember them. You need to by heart them, because moving forward, all our lectures will be mainly based on these, and we'll be repeating these terms again and again. Especially, pipelines, activities, datasets and linked services, IR runtimes, and triggers. So if my way of explanation was a little bit faster, if my pace was fast, I'm extremely sorry on that. So you can also adjust the video speed within the YouTube. You can do that. And if you feel I'm slow, you can also speed it up as well. And I hope you like this video. And like I said, please subscribe to our channel, which gives us a lot of encouragement and motivation to create uh, more content or similar content like this. And thank you. Have a great day. Keep learning, and keep sharing. Bye.